responsibility is supposed to come with time. It is meant to arrive gradually, carried in small decisions that teach you how much weight you can bear. It grows alongside identity, learning, and failure, shaped by mistakes that do not permanently scar. For most people, responsibility is something you grow into. For Morty Smith, it is something that falls on him before he has the language to understand what is happening. At first, it does not feel like responsibility. It feels like discomfort, a pressure behind his thoughts, a lingering heaviness that follows him even after danger has passed. When Rick moves on, Morty stays behind emotionally. When an adventure ends, Rick resets immediately, treating survival as success, treating outcomes as neutral data points. Morty does not reset. He carries fragments forward. He remembers faces. He remembers fear. He remembers moments where something irreversible happened and no one stopped to acknowledge it. That is where responsibility begins for him, not as authority, but as awareness. Someone has to notice when things go too far. Someone has to feel the consequences when others refuse to. And Morty becomes that someone long before he understands what it costs. Rick operates at a scale where morality becomes inefficient. When everything is replaceable, ethics feel optional. When outcomes can be undone, harm feels theoretical. Rick's brilliance allows him to bypass hesitation, to act without emotional friction. But every system that removes friction creates pressure elsewhere. That pressure settles into Morty. Morty becomes the moral center, not because he wants to be good, but because he cannot stop caring. He notices when lives are treated as expendable. He notices when cruelty is justified by intelligence. He notices when convenience replaces compassion. And noticing is exhausting. There is something deeply unnatural about a child becoming the conscience of an adult. Children are supposed to test boundaries, not enforce them. They are supposed to learn responsibility, not absorb it wholesale. When Morty finds himself compensating for Rick's emotional absence, something inside him fractures quietly. He learns to apologize for harm he did not initiate. He learns to feel guilty for outcomes he could not prevent. He learns to carry blame because someone has to. Responsibility arrives too early when there is no one else willing to hold it. Morty's role is not formal. No one appoints him as the ethical anchor. There is no ceremony, no acknowledgement. It happens through repetition, through moments where Rick dismisses consequences and Morty cannot, through situations where chaos unfolds and Morty feels the need to say something, even when he knows it will not matter. Over time, this shapes him. He becomes hyper-aware of impact. He feels weight in places others feel freedom. He hesitates where others rush forward. Hesitation is often mistaken for weakness. In Morty, it is sensitivity under strain. Responsibility does not make him confident. It makes him anxious. It teaches him that if he does not pay attention, something terrible will happen, and it will be his fault for not stopping it. He learns that silence is complicity. He learns that passivity feels like guilt. He learns that caring means carrying pain that has nowhere to go. That is far too much for a developing mind. Morty's fear is not just fear of danger. It is fear of failing morally. Fear of becoming someone who lets things happen without protest. Fear of becoming numb, the way Rick is numb. Fear of waking up one day and realizing that nothing registers anymore. This fear shapes his choices. It slows him down. It makes him second-guess himself. It makes him question his own instincts, especially when they conflict with Rick's logic. Rick's intelligence casts a long shadow, and in that shadow, Morty learns to doubt his own moral compass. When someone smarter than you dismisses your concern, it becomes harder to trust your concern. Morty is repeatedly taught that his reactions are emotional, naive, inefficient. He is told, implicitly and explicitly, that caring is a flaw in a universe that rewards detachment. Over time, this erodes his confidence not just in his judgment, but in his future self. How do you grow into responsibility when responsibility arrived before you were ready? Instead of responsibility strengthening him, it weighs him down. It becomes associated with guilt rather than agency. He does not feel empowered by it. He feels trapped by it. Responsibility becomes something that happens to him, not something he chooses. And yet, he keeps carrying it. That is the quiet tragedy of Morty's role. He does not step away. He does not become indifferent. Even when it hurts, even when it isolates him, he continues to care. He continues to notice. He continues to feel responsible for the emotional aftermath of actions he did not initiate. This makes him older than his peers in ways that cannot be measured. At school, responsibility is still theoretical. Homework, grades, expectations. But Morty has already learned about irreversible consequences. He has already seen lives end. He has already made choices that ripple beyond correction. Sitting in a classroom, surrounded by people worrying about temporary failures, he carries knowledge that has no outlet. Responsibility without context is suffocating. Morty's sense of morality develops under pressure, without safety, without mentorship. Rick does not guide him ethically. Rick bypasses ethics entirely. Morty is left to build his own moral framework while actively navigating situations that test it beyond its limits. This forces him into premature adulthood. Not the confident kind, the fragile kind. He becomes careful. He becomes apologetic. He becomes burdened with the feeling that if he does not intervene, something terrible will happen, and it will be on him. That sense of obligation never fully rests. It follows him into moments of calm. It lingers after danger passes. It sits with him in quiet spaces. Responsibility that arrives too early does not mature cleanly. It warps. It blends with fear. It attaches itself to identity. Morty does not just feel responsible. He feels like he is responsible for outcomes, for people, for preventing harm in a universe that makes harm inevitable. That is an impossible task, and yet Morty keeps trying. Not because he believes he can succeed, but because not trying feels worse. There is something profoundly human in that. Morty's responsibility is not heroic. It is not celebrated. It is heavy, confusing, and often unrewarded. But it is real, and it shapes him more deeply than any single traumatic event ever could. He becomes the moral center before he is ready. And once that role settles into him, it never fully leaves. Even when he wants to be a child again, even when he wants to let go, even when he wants someone else to carry the weight. Responsibility arrived too early, and it stayed. responsibility that arrives too early does not simply shape behavior. It reshapes perception. Morty begins to see the world through the lens of consequence before he has learned how to protect himself from it. Every action carries an echo. Every choice feels heavier than it should. He does not experience events in isolation. He experiences their aftermath before it happens. This anticipatory weight settles into him quietly, turning ordinary moments into sites of tension. He learns to scan situations for what might go wrong. He learns to anticipate fallout. He learns to feel accountable for outcomes he cannot control. This is how responsibility embeds itself into his nervous system. It is no longer a thought. It is a reflex. When something feels wrong, his body reacts before his mind catches up. His stomach tightens. His breath shortens. He feels compelled to intervene even when intervention costs him safety, comfort, or dignity. The need to do something becomes stronger than the instinct to protect himself. That is not maturity. That is overload. Children are supposed to test morality in small, contained ways. They learn right and wrong through guidance, through boundaries that are firm but forgiving. Morty's moral education takes place in environments where mistakes carry irreversible consequences. There is no margin for error. There is no gentle correction. There is only survival. This teaches him a dangerous lesson, that being wrong is catastrophic. So he becomes careful, excessively careful. He begins to doubt every instinct, every impulse, every emotional response. If something goes wrong, he assumes it must be because he failed to stop it. Responsibility becomes indistinguishable from self-blame, and Rick, unintentionally or not, reinforces this. Rick does not acknowledge emotional fallout. He does not pause to reflect on harm. He moves forward relentlessly, treating each event as solved once the immediate threat is neutralized. In that vacuum, Morty absorbs what Rick leaves behind: the unprocessed guilt, the unresolved fear, the moral residue that has nowhere else to go. Morty becomes the container for emotional consequences. Containers eventually crack. But Morty does not break loudly. He breaks internally, in small ways, in moments of hesitation, in the way his confidence erodes, in the way he begins to shrink his expectations for himself and for the future. Responsibility arriving too early does not make you strong. It makes you cautious in ways that resemble fear. Morty's fear is often misread. It is not fear of danger. He has faced danger repeatedly. It is fear of causing harm, fear of failing ethically, fear of becoming someone who looks back and realizes they stopped caring when it mattered. That fear keeps him awake. It keeps him alert. It keeps him burdened. He does not get to experience responsibility as empowerment. He experiences it as vigilance, a constant watchfulness that never turns off. Even when nothing is happening, he feels like something could happen, and that it will somehow be his fault if it does. This is the quiet anxiety of someone who became the moral center too early. It isolates him from others his age. While his peers are learning who they want to be, Morty is preoccupied with who he must not become. His identity forms around avoidance rather than aspiration. He does not ask what kind of adult he wants to be. He asks what kind of adult he is afraid of becoming. And the image that haunts him is always close by. Rick represents one possible future, a future of brilliance without softness, intelligence without patience, survival without peace. Morty looks at that future and feels responsible not to repeat it, yet feels powerless to imagine an alternative. Responsibility without vision is paralyzing. He knows what he does not want. He does not know what he can safely hope for. That uncertainty makes growth frightening. Growing up feels like stepping toward a version of himself he does not trust yet. Responsibility has taught him caution, but it has not taught him confidence. Still, something remarkable persists. Despite the weight, despite the fear, despite the early fracture, Morty keeps caring. He keeps feeling disturbed by cruelty. He keeps noticing suffering. He keeps wanting things to be better, even when he does not believe they will be. That persistence is not weakness. It is endurance of a different kind. Responsibility that arrives too early often crushes empathy. In Morty, it threatens too, but does not quite succeed. His sensitivity bends under pressure, but it does not disappear. It becomes quieter, more guarded, but it remains. This is why Morty is compelling. He is not heroic in the traditional sense. He does not wield responsibility with confidence or clarity. He carries it awkwardly, painfully, uncertain whether he is doing it right. But he carries it anyway. That is not because he is ready. It is because no one else is willing. And in that unwillingness, Morty learns something tragic and profound. That adulthood is not something you earn by growing older. Sometimes it is something you are forced into, when the people around you refuse to carry their share. Morty's story is not about becoming strong too soon. It is about being made responsible before being made safe. That difference matters, because responsibility without safety does not create leaders. It creates survivors. And Morty survives with his heart still exposed. That exposure hurts him, but it also preserves something essential. A refusal to stop caring, a refusal to become numb, a quiet insistence that consequences matter, even in an infinite universe. Responsibility arrived too early for Morty Smith, but instead of hardening him completely, it revealed the fragile, painful truth at his center, that caring in a world like his is an act of resistance. And even when he is overwhelmed, uncertain, and afraid, he keeps resisting. That resistance does not announce itself loudly. It does not take the shape of speeches or defiance. It appears in hesitation, in doubt, in the quiet moment where Morty feels the urge to look away and chooses not to. Responsibility that arrives too early teaches you to notice what others ignore. Morty becomes attuned to emotional aftermath, the way some people become attuned to danger. He senses when something has gone wrong, even if everyone else has already moved on. That sensitivity becomes a kind of loneliness. It separates him from those who can forget. For Rick, forgetting is efficiency. For Morty, forgetting feels like betrayal. This is another way responsibility burdens him. It denies him the comfort of distance. He cannot place events neatly in the past. They stay present, resurfacing at unexpected times, coloring unrelated moments with unease. A laugh feels incomplete. A calm day feels provisional. There is always the sense that something unresolved is waiting just beneath the surface. Responsibility embeds itself into his sense of time. The past does not recede. The future does not feel open. Everything collapses into a tense, watchful present. This is not how childhood is supposed to feel. Children are meant to believe that someone else is in charge, that there is an adult somewhere who understands what is happening and will step in if things go too far. Morty learns very quickly that this belief is unreliable. The most powerful adult in his life understands everything and still chooses not to care. That realization is devastating. It forces Morty into a role reversal that reshapes him permanently. He begins monitoring Rick instead of relying on him. He watches for excess, for recklessness, for moments where intelligence overrides humanity. This vigilance costs him something essential: trust. Without trust, responsibility becomes constant. He cannot relax. He cannot assume safety. He cannot believe that someone else will fix things. Even when Rick is present, Morty feels alone with the burden of caring. This is why responsibility exhausts him. It is never shared. It is never acknowledged. It is simply expected to be absorbed. Over time, this expectation becomes internalized. Morty begins to believe that it is his job to feel bad when things go wrong, his job to feel guilty, his job to remember. Memory becomes part of his responsibility. He remembers the faces that Rick forgets. He remembers the fear that others dismiss. He remembers the weight of moments that were treated as disposable. Remembering hurts, but forgetting feels worse. This creates an impossible bind. Morty cannot move forward without carrying the past, but carrying the past makes forward movement heavy. Growth becomes strained. Maturity feels less like expansion and more like compression. Responsibility that arrives too early does not prepare you for adulthood. It makes adulthood feel like an ongoing test you are always failing. Morty is constantly aware of how fragile he feels. He knows he is not equipped for the weight he carries. He knows he is improvising morality in environments that do not reward it. This awareness does not embolden him. It makes him anxious, cautious, and self-critical. Yet it also sharpens him. He learns to read emotional undercurrents quickly. He learns to detect when harm is being rationalized. He learns to recognize the moment when logic becomes excuse. These are skills usually developed over decades, shaped by experience and reflection. Morty acquires them abruptly, under pressure, without guidance. They become part of him before he has the chance to decide if he wants them. Responsibility arrives too early, and it stays too long, but it does not hollow him out completely. There is a quiet strength in the way Morty continues to feel, not bravely, not confidently, but persistently. He allows himself to be affected even when being affected hurts. He does not shut down entirely. He does not fully surrender to numbness. That choice is never framed as a choice. It is simply who he is. In a universe that encourages detachment, Morty's continued sensitivity is an anomaly. It slows him, it frightens him, it isolates him, but it also preserves his capacity for connection. Connection is risky when responsibility has taught you that harm is everywhere. Morty still reaches for it, carefully, tentatively, as if afraid that caring might cost him more than he can afford, yet unwilling to abandon it completely. This tension defines him. He is not the moral center because he knows the right answers. He is the moral center because he refuses to stop asking the questions, and that refusal is exhausting. Responsibility that arrives too early takes years to unlearn. It embeds itself in posture, in thought patterns, in emotional reflexes. Morty may grow older, stronger, more experienced, but that early weight will always be part of his foundation. It will shape how he loves, how he hesitates, how he doubts himself. But it will also shape how he protects what still feels fragile. Morty does not grow up cleanly. He grows up carefully, and in that care, strained, fearful, incomplete, there is something quietly hopeful. Not optimism, not certainty, but a refusal to become indifferent. Responsibility arrived too early, but instead of erasing Morty, it revealed the depth of what he is still willing to carry, even when he is not ready, even when it hurts, even when no one asks him to. He carries it anyway, and that is the quiet cost and quiet courage of becoming the moral center before you are ready. Responsibility that arrives too early teaches you that stopping is dangerous. If you stop paying attention, something might slip through. Something irreversible might happen. Morty internalizes this belief long before he has the tools to question it. Vigilance becomes his default state. Even in moments of calm, part of him remains braced. This is how responsibility reshapes the body. His shoulders carry tension he cannot explain. His thoughts loop around potential outcomes. His emotions arrive already filtered through worry. He does not experience peace as safety. He experiences it as a temporary pause between problems. That is the cost of being the moral center without authority. Morty notices harm, but he cannot always prevent it. He feels responsibility without control. This imbalance creates a quiet despair that never fully surfaces, but never fully leaves either. Powerless responsibility is one of the heaviest burdens a person can carry. When Morty tries to assert himself, he is often overridden. Rick's logic is faster, sharper, louder. It reframes situations before Morty's concerns can settle. In those moments, Morty learns another lesson, that being right does not guarantee being heard. This erodes his confidence not only in his voice, but in the value of speaking at all. Silence becomes another form of responsibility. If he cannot change the outcome, he can at least witness it. Witnessing is not neutral. It leaves marks. Morty begins to accumulate memories that have no place to go. They do not fit into conversation. They do not resolve into lessons. They simply exist, pressing inward. This internal pressure shapes how he relates to himself. He becomes more hesitant, more self-questioning, more careful about his own impulses. Responsibility that arrives too early often teaches self-surveillance. Morty watches himself the way he watches Rick. He monitors his reactions. He questions his instincts. He worries that if he relaxes too much, he might become careless. He might become someone who stops noticing when things go wrong. That fear keeps him small in some ways. He does not trust himself to grow freely. Growth feels dangerous when you are afraid of becoming indifferent. Morty worries that adulthood might strip away the part of him that still feels. He sees how easily intelligence can harden into detachment. He worries that strength might come at the cost of compassion, so he hesitates at the threshold of change. This hesitation is often mistaken for weakness. In truth, it is resistance. Morty resists becoming numb. He resists letting consequences dissolve into abstraction. He resists the idea that caring is a flaw. That resistance costs him energy every day. Responsibility that arrives too early does not come with rest days. It does not wait for you to recover. It accumulates quietly, layer by layer, shaping personality before identity has a chance to settle. Morty's humor softens under the weight. His optimism becomes cautious. His hope becomes conditional. Yet, it does not disappear. It adapts. It becomes quieter, more fragile, but also more deliberate. He learns to hope carefully. Careful hope is not loud. It does not demand the future. It simply asks that things not be entirely meaningless. Morty's continued caring is an act of defiance against a universe that rewards detachment. He does not articulate this defiance. He lives it. Every time he notices suffering, every time he hesitates before harm, every time he feels guilt where others feel nothing, this is not a burden he chose. It is one he inherited. Responsibility arrived too early because someone had to hold the line between chaos and conscience. Morty stepped into that space, not because he was ready, but because the alternative was worse. And in doing so, he became something unusual. Not a hero, not a leader, but a reminder. A reminder that intelligence without care is empty, that survival without reflection is hollow, that growth without gentleness is not progress. Morty does not carry responsibility gracefully. He carries it awkwardly, painfully, uncertainly. But he carries it with a sincerity that Rick has long abandoned. That sincerity is fragile. It could still break. But as long as it survives, it proves something quietly radical. That even in a universe that makes responsibility unbearable, choosing to care is still possible. Responsibility arrived too early, but it did not erase Morty. It shaped him into someone who feels the weight of the universe and still refuses to drop it entirely. And in that refusal, there is a kind of strength that does not announce itself. A strength that simply stays. That staying does not feel heroic. It feels heavy, constant, and unfinished. Responsibility that arrives too early does not grant clarity. It creates fog. Morty moves through that fog every day, guided more by instinct than certainty. He does not know if his choices are right. He only knows that not choosing feels worse. Inaction feels like abandonment. Silence feels like consent. This is how responsibility becomes moral pressure rather than moral confidence. Morty does not trust outcomes. He trusts feelings. When something feels wrong, he cannot ignore it, even when logic tells him it is inevitable, even when Rick insists that resistance is pointless. Morty learns to live with the discomfort of caring in situations where caring changes nothing. That discomfort reshapes his sense of fairness. Fairness stops being about balance and starts being about harm reduction. He does not ask what is deserved. He asks what hurts less. He does not look for justice. He looks for mercy. These are adult calculations made by a child who should still be learning what fairness even means. Responsibility that arrives too early forces moral compromise. Morty begins to understand that there are no clean choices. Every option carries damage. Every solution leaves something broken. He learns this lesson not through theory, but through repetition. Through worlds where survival requires sacrifice. Through moments where saving one thing means losing another. This knowledge sits heavily in him. It teaches him restraint. It teaches him grief. It teaches him that being good does not guarantee being right. That realization would be difficult at any age. For Morty, it becomes foundational. He does not get to build his identity on confidence or ambition. He builds it on caution and care. He becomes someone who thinks before acting, not because he is slow, but because he is afraid of what action might destroy. Fear, in this context, is not weakness. It is awareness without protection. Morty's fear of responsibility is not fear of effort. It is fear of irreversible harm. He knows too well that some mistakes do not fade. Some choices do not reset. Some guilt does not dissolve, even in a multiverse designed to erase consequences. Rick treats consequences as inconveniences. Morty experiences them as scars. Scars do not stop hurting just because they are old. They shape movement. They limit reach. They remind you where you have already been wounded. Responsibility that arrives too early leaves scars that never fully fade. Morty carries them quietly. He does not display them. He does not dramatize them. They simply influence how close he lets himself get to danger, to others, to himself. He becomes cautious with hope. Hope feels dangerous when responsibility has taught you how easily things break. Morty hopes, but he does so softly, as if afraid that hoping too loudly might invite disappointment. He learns to expect loss even in moments of joy. This expectation dulls happiness, but it also prepares him for survival. Survival becomes the metric by which adulthood is measured. Morty worries that growing up means becoming someone who survives at the cost of feeling. He sees that cost reflected in Rick. He sees how intelligence can calcify into indifference, how brilliance can coexist with loneliness, how control can replace connection. That future frightens him. Responsibility that arrives too early does not just burden the present. It casts long shadows over the future. Morty is afraid not only of what he has already become, but of what continued exposure might turn him into. He fears losing his softness. He fears losing his hesitation. He fears losing the part of himself that still feels pain when something is wrong. Those fears slow him. They make growth feel dangerous. They make adulthood feel like a narrowing rather than an opening. And yet, despite all of this, Morty continues forward. Not confidently, not decisively, but persistently. Persistence becomes his defining trait. He endures emotional weight without hardening completely. He adapts without surrendering entirely. He learns without fully accepting the lessons that would make him numb. Responsibility arrived too early, but it did not finish shaping him. There is still uncertainty in him, still doubt, still a quiet refusal to accept that this is all there is. That refusal is small. It does not fix anything. It does not change the universe. But it preserves something essential, the idea that care has value, even when it hurts. Morty carries responsibility not because he believes he can save everything, but because he believes that noticing matters. That feeling matters. That being affected is not a flaw. In a universe built on disposability, Morty remains someone who treats things as if they cannot be easily replaced. That belief costs him, but it also defines him. Responsibility arrived too early. It bent him. It weighed him down. It made growing up frightening, but it did not empty him. And as long as Morty continues to feel the weight of consequences, continues to hesitate, to care, to question, there remains the possibility that adulthood does not have to look like Rick. That possibility is fragile, uncertain, unproven, but it exists. And for Morty, that is enough to keep going. That forward movement is slow. It is not marked by milestones or sudden clarity. It is measured instead by endurance, by the quiet decision to keep carrying responsibility even when it feels unbearable. Morty learns that responsibility does not always reward you. Sometimes it only asks more. Sometimes it deepens without explanation. Sometimes it grows heavier the more sincerely you try to hold it. This realization would harden many people. In Morty, it creates a different reaction. Caution layered over compassion. He becomes someone who pauses before acting, not because he lacks courage, but because he understands cost. He understands that every choice removes something from the world, even when it adds something else. That understanding makes him careful in ways that isolate him from those who move freely through consequence. Responsibility that arrives too early teaches you to mourn outcomes that never fully happened. Morty imagines alternate paths constantly. Worlds where a different decision might have spared someone. Moments where a pause could have changed everything. These imagined versions linger alongside reality, creating a sense that the present is never the only version that matters. This multiplicity weighs on him. It makes certainty impossible. It makes closure rare. It makes peace conditional. Morty begins to carry responsibility not just for what he did, but for what he could have done differently. That burden has no endpoint. There is no lesson that completes it. There is only accumulation. Accumulation reshapes identity. Morty does not become decisive. He becomes reflective. He does not become assertive. He becomes attentive. These traits are rarely celebrated in environments driven by power and efficiency. They are easy to overlook, easy to dismiss, but they are not insignificant. Responsibility that arrives too early often erases the space where play used to live. Morty still seeks play, still reaches for moments of levity and normalcy. But those moments feel fragile now. They carry an awareness of how easily they could be interrupted, how easily they could be taken away. Joy becomes something to protect rather than something to assume. Protecting joy requires vigilance. Vigilance costs energy. Energy is already depleted. Yet Morty continues. He continues to care even when caring makes him tired. He continues to feel even when feeling complicates survival. He continues to hesitate, even when hesitation is punished. This persistence is not naive. It is informed. Morty knows exactly how little his concern changes the universe. He knows how often things go wrong anyway. And still, he refuses to stop noticing. Responsibility arrived too early, and it did not prepare him for adulthood in the way people imagine adulthood should be prepared for. It did not give him confidence. It did not give him authority. It gave him weight, and left him to figure out how to stand under it. Standing under weight for too long changes posture. Morty's posture is one of quiet endurance. He bends slightly, accommodating the pressure rather than fighting it head-on. He does not break dramatically. He adapts incrementally. Incremental adaptation is invisible from the outside. It looks like stagnation. It looks like fear. It looks like immaturity. From the inside, it feels like survival without rest. Responsibility that arrives too early leaves little room for self-forgiveness. Morty struggles to forgive himself because he feels that forgiveness might lead to carelessness. If he lets go of guilt too easily, Something important might slip. Something essential might be lost. So he holds on to guilt longer than he should. Guilt becomes another form of responsibility. It keeps him attentive. It keeps him restrained. It keeps him anchored to consequence. But it also keeps him from fully healing. Morty's growth is uneven because responsibility arrived before he had a chance to learn how to release it. He knows how to carry weight. He does not know how to set it down. No one taught him. Rick never models rest. The universe never offers it. Time never slows enough to allow it. So Morty grows around the weight instead of through it. This makes his development subtle, difficult to notice, and easy to underestimate. He does not transform loudly. He accumulates understanding quietly. He learns the cost of things before he learns their value. And yet, through all of this, something remains intact. Morty does not stop believing that responsibility matters, not as obligation, but as evidence that actions affect others, that choices echo, that awareness has value even when it hurts. This belief is fragile. It could still collapse, but it has not. Responsibility arrived too early, but it did not extinguish Morty's capacity to hope. It reshaped hope into something smaller, more cautious, but also more resilient. Hope becomes less about outcomes and more about integrity, less about fixing the universe, and more about not losing oneself inside it. Morty does not hope to be powerful. He hopes to remain kind. He hopes to remain sensitive without being destroyed by it. That hope is quiet. It does not demand fulfillment. It simply asks to survive. In a world that constantly tests the limits of empathy, Morty's continued willingness to feel responsible, too early, too deeply, too painfully, is what keeps him human. Responsibility arrived too early, but instead of erasing Morty, it carved him into someone who understands weight, and who, despite everything, still chooses to carry it. That choice is never reaffirmed consciously. Morty does not wake up and decide to keep carrying responsibility. It is already there when he opens his eyes. It has become part of how he inhabits the world, the way gravity is part of movement. He adjusts to it without ceremony, without praise, without relief. Responsibility that arrives too early often teaches you that relief is temporary and unreliable. Morty learns this lesson repeatedly. Moments of calm do not feel earned. They feel borrowed. He enjoys them cautiously, as if afraid that fully relaxing might invite disaster. This constant vigilance dulls pleasure before it can settle. Pleasure feels fragile when you expect interruption. Morty's internal world becomes organized around prevention rather than possibility. He does not imagine what might be good. He imagines what might go wrong. This habit keeps him alert, but it also limits his sense of potential. The future feels less like an open space and more like a series of hazards to navigate carefully. That is not how childhood is supposed to end. For Morty, childhood does not shatter all at once. It thins. It becomes porous. Responsibility seeps into it gradually, dissolving the boundary between play and consequence. Games stop being pure distraction. Laughter carries an undertone of awareness. Even innocence begins to feel conditional. He learns that ignorance is not safety. He learns that knowledge does not protect you either. This leaves him suspended between states, no longer fully a child, not yet equipped to be an adult. Responsibility arrives without instruction. There is no guide for how to carry it without being crushed. Morty improvises. Improvisation under pressure breeds caution. He second-guesses his impulses. He waits longer than he should. He retreats inward when overwhelmed. These responses keep him alive emotionally, but they also slow his development in ways that are easy to misinterpret. From the outside, he looks hesitant. From the inside, he is calculating survival. Responsibility that arrives too early makes every mistake feel fatal. Morty internalizes the belief that there is no room for error. He treats failure as moral failure rather than learning. This belief does not come from arrogance. It comes from experience. He has seen mistakes cascade into irreversible harm. So he becomes careful with himself, sometimes too careful. That carefulness protects others at the expense of his own growth. He suppresses anger. He minimizes his needs. He accepts discomfort as normal. Over time, this pattern teaches him that his well-being is secondary to preventing harm. This is a dangerous lesson. Responsibility without self-compassion leads to quiet erosion. Morty does not burn out dramatically. He dims. His reactions soften. His expectations lower. He adapts to carrying weight by becoming smaller around it. Yet even as he adapts, he does not disappear. There is a stubborn persistence in him that refuses to let responsibility turn into indifference. He does not use burden as an excuse to stop caring. Instead, he lets it slow him, humble him, and reshape his sense of what matters. He learns that being responsible does not mean being powerful. It means being attentive. It means staying present with discomfort rather than escaping it. This lesson is costly, but it is not meaningless. Morty's responsibility is not abstract. It is relational. It exists because others exist, because harm is real, because actions leave marks that do not fade just because the universe is large. In a multiverse designed to dilute consequence, Morty remains someone who experiences consequence fully. That experience isolates him, but it also grounds him. He becomes a point of gravity in a world that encourages drift. Responsibility arrived too early, and it made growing up frightening. It made adulthood feel like a narrowing of possibility rather than an expansion. But it also gave Morty a depth of awareness that cannot be easily erased. Depth comes at a cost. It slows you. It weighs you down. It makes joy complicated. But it also anchors you when everything else feels disposable. Morty's responsibility is not a gift. It is a burden. But it is also the reason he remains sensitive in a universe that rewards numbness. It is the reason he continues to question outcomes rather than accepting them as inevitable. It is the reason he still feels unsettled when something goes wrong. Responsibility arrived too early. It did not make Morty ready, but it made him aware. And that awareness, fragile, exhausting, unresolved, is what allows him to remain human in a world that constantly tempts him to stop being so. He grows anyway, slowly, unevenly, with fear still present, not because responsibility prepared him, but because, despite everything, he refuses to let it erase him. Memory is usually shared. It is shaped by conversation, reinforced by others who remember the same moments, the same places, the same mistakes. Memory becomes lighter when it is distributed. When others carry pieces of it with you, it stops feeling like a private burden. But for Morty Smith, memory is often solitary. He remembers things that no one else can. worlds that no longer exist, people who were real only once, moments that mattered deeply and then vanished without acknowledgement. This is not just about trauma. It is about isolation through experience. Morty's memories are not validated by the world around him. They cannot be referenced casually. They cannot be processed collectively. They linger without context, without ritual, without resolution. He carries them alone, not because he chooses to, but because there is nowhere else to put them. When something ends in his life, it rarely ends cleanly. It disappears. And disappearance does not provide closure. It leaves questions suspended. It leaves emotions unfinished. It leaves Morty holding reactions that feel disproportionate to the present moment, because they belong to a past no one else remembers. This creates a subtle disconnect. Morty lives among people who share his space, but not his history. Their worries feel small, not because they are unimportant, but because he has learned how fragile entire realities can be. When someone laughs at a problem, he remembers a version of that problem ending everything. When someone shrugs off a mistake, he remembers how mistakes can echo endlessly. He does not correct them. He does not explain. He simply carries the contrast. Carrying unshared memory changes how you relate to time. The present never feels complete because it is layered with versions of itself that no longer exist. Morty walks through ordinary days with extraordinary recollections, hovering just behind his awareness. They surface unexpectedly, triggered by trivial things. A phrase, a place, a feeling that suddenly expands into something much larger. He learns to manage this quietly, not by forgetting, but by compartmentalizing. Compartmentalization becomes another survival skill acquired too early. Morty learns how to tuck memories away just enough to function. He learns which thoughts can be touched and which must remain sealed. This is not repression born of denial. It is containment born of necessity. If he felt everything all the time, he would collapse. So he becomes selective with his awareness. This selectivity comes at a cost. It fragments his sense of self. Parts of him belong to experiences that cannot be spoken about. Other parts belong to a life that demands normalcy. He switches between these internal states constantly, learning how to present only what fits the moment. Over time, this creates distance, even from himself. He is not always sure which version of him is the real one. The boy at school, the survivor of impossible situations, the child who wants simplicity, the person who has already seen too much to believe in it fully. All of them coexist. None of them feel complete. Remembering things no one else does also alters responsibility. Morty feels accountable not just for what is happening now, but for what happened in versions of reality that no longer exist. Even when outcomes are erased, the feeling of having been there remains. He remembers choices that no longer technically matter, but still feel morally significant. This creates a unique form of guilt. Guilt without witnesses. Guilt without consequence. Guilt without redemption. It lingers because it cannot be resolved through acknowledgement or repair. There is no one to apologize to, no one to forgive him. The memory exists in isolation, looping quietly in his mind. Rick does not share this burden. Rick remembers facts. Morty remembers feelings. Facts can be archived. Feelings persist. This difference shapes their relationship more than any argument ever could. Rick moves forward easily because his memories are informational. Morty moves forward slowly because his memories are emotional. He does not just know what happened. He remembers how it felt to be there. Feeling is heavier than knowing. The weight of unshared memory also makes Morty cautious with attachment. He has learned how easily people vanish, not just through death, but through erasure, through timelines collapsing, through realities resetting. Attachment begins to feel temporary by default. This does not stop him from caring. It changes how he cares. He holds people gently, as if aware that they might disappear without warning. He does not assume continuity. He appreciates moments without expecting permanence. This makes his affection quiet, sometimes hesitant, but deeply sincere. It also makes loss constant. Even when nothing is lost, the possibility remains present. Memory teaches him that stability is provisional, that safety is contextual, that everything exists on borrowed time. Growing up with that knowledge reshapes maturity. Morty does not grow toward certainty. He grows toward acceptance of fragility. He learns that remembering is both a gift and a burden. That memory preserves meaning, but also preserves pain. That forgetting might be easier, but it would cost him something essential. So, he keeps remembering, even when it hurts, even when it isolates him, even when no one else knows what he is carrying. Because remembering, for Morty, is proof that those moments mattered, that those lives mattered, that those choices mattered, even if the universe moved on as if they did not. In a reality that erases outcomes effortlessly, Morty becomes someone who refuses to let experience dissolve completely. He remembers, and in that remembering, he holds on to a version of himself that the universe keeps trying to discard. Remembering does not stay contained forever. Even when Morty learns how to compartmentalize, how to tuck memories into quiet corners of his mind, they still shape the way he moves through the world. Memory leaks. It seeps into posture, into tone, into the way he hesitates before speaking or acting. He becomes someone who pauses not because he is unsure, but because he is remembering too much at once. Memory teaches him restraint. He has seen what happens when things escalate unchecked. He has witnessed how quickly situations spiral beyond repair. This knowledge settles into his instincts, slowing him down. Where others rush forward, he calculates emotionally. Where others act on impulse, he considers aftermath. This consideration is not strategic. It is protective. Protective of others, protective of himself, protective of meaning. But protection has a cost. Morty's memories make him cautious in ways that are difficult to explain. He cannot say why certain jokes make him uncomfortable, or why certain risks feel unbearable. The reasons live in places no one else can access. So he learns to accept misunderstanding as part of his daily life. Misunderstanding becomes familiar. People see his hesitation and assume fear. They see his quietness and assume passivity. They see his concern and assume weakness. Morty rarely corrects them. Correcting would require explaining experiences that cannot be shared. It would require reopening memories he works hard to keep contained. Silence becomes easier. Silence becomes another form of self-protection. Over time, this silence deepens his isolation. He is surrounded by people, yet internally alone. His inner world is crowded with memories, but none of them can be spoken aloud. This creates a strange contradiction. He feels full and empty at the same time, full of experience, empty of connection around that experience. Connection requires shared reference points. Morty's reference points no longer exist. This disconnect subtly alters his sense of belonging. He belongs physically to his environment, but emotionally to something else entirely. A series of moments that have no place in the present. This makes him feel older than he is, not in wisdom, but in wear. Wear accumulates quietly. It appears in the way he manages expectations. He stops assuming good outcomes. He prepares for loss even in moments of calm. This preparation does not come from pessimism. It comes from familiarity. He has learned how quickly everything can vanish. Memory teaches impermanence better than philosophy ever could. Morty does not theorize about meaninglessness. He has lived it. He has watched meaning dissolve without ceremony. He has seen entire narratives erased as if they never mattered. And yet, he continues to treat moments as if they do. That contradiction defines him. He remembers worlds that no longer validate his memory. He remembers people who cannot confirm his grief. He remembers choices that no longer have consequences. And still, he cares. This caring is not loud. It is not confident. It is careful, almost fragile. He cares the way someone cares when they know how easily care can become pain. He holds on to meaning lightly, not because it is unimportant, but because he knows how easily it can shatter. Memory reshapes his sense of responsibility as well. He feels responsible for honoring what no longer exists, for remembering what has been erased, for carrying forward the emotional truth of events that have been wiped clean. This is not a duty anyone assigns him. It is something he assigns himself, quietly. Someone has to remember. Someone has to feel the weight of what was lost. Someone has to acknowledge that it mattered. Morty becomes that someone by default. This role isolates him further. There is no reward for it, no recognition, no relief. Remembering does not fix anything. It does not restore what was lost. It simply keeps the loss from disappearing completely. That is a heavy task for anyone, especially for someone still growing. Morty's growth is shaped by memory in ways that are difficult to undo. He does not get to grow into forgetfulness. He does not get to soften his past with nostalgia. His memories are sharp, precise, and unresolved. They resist reinterpretation. This sharpness makes him sensitive to suffering. He notices pain quickly. He recognizes it in others, even when they try to hide it. This sensitivity is a direct result of remembering pain that no one else acknowledges. He learns to read emotional cues the way others read danger signs. This skill keeps him empathetic. It also keeps him tired. Carrying memory without release drains energy. Morty does not have rituals for letting go. There are no shared stories, no collective mourning, no validation. Everything is internal. Everything is ongoing. This makes rest difficult. Even when his body is still, his mind revisits places it has been before, not obsessively, but persistently. Memory surfaces at inconvenient times, demanding acknowledgement. He does not fight it aggressively. He lets it pass through him, absorbing the weight quietly. This quiet endurance becomes another defining trait. Morty does not resist memory. He survives it. Survival, in his case, does not mean forgetting. It means learning how to live alongside experiences that never received closure. It means carrying unresolved narratives without letting them dominate every moment. This balance is delicate. Sometimes it falters. There are moments when the weight becomes too much, when the distance between his inner world and the outer one feels unbearable. In those moments, he withdraws further. He grows quieter. He becomes harder to reach, not because he does not want connection, but because connection feels impossible without shared memory. Yet even then, he does not fully retreat. He still seeks small anchors, familiar routines, simple interactions, ordinary moments that ground him in the present. These moments do not erase memory, but they give it context. They remind him that life continues, even when the past remains unresolved. Memory teaches him fragility. The present teaches him persistence. Morty lives at the intersection of both. He remembers what no one else does, and he keeps moving anyway. Not because he has made peace with it, but because stopping would mean letting those memories disappear completely. And that, for him, feels like a loss he cannot accept.